Uh, I am Tariq Smart Day, the executor of the Tariq Smart Day Living Trust and the registered owner of the Tariq Smart Day Ex Relatione Kingdom Wilson Estate.
Right. So you are appearing here without an attorney. I do have to advise you that you are charged with the offense of fleeing and eluding in the third degree under the Motor Vehicle Code. That is a felony punishable by up to 5 years incarceration and or a $1,000 fine plus court costs. Additionally, the Secretary of State could suspend your driving privileges for up to a year. Do you understand that, sir?
I comprehend.
Do you understand?
I comprehend, yes.
The court has to further advise you that if you wish to be represented by counsel, the court would ensure that counsel would be appointed to represent you in this matter, and that you would have counsel if you could not afford to hire counsel yourself. I also wish to advise you that the court would be treating you the same as it would the people in this case. There are certain dangers to representing yourself in this matter, in that you will be required to abide by the Michigan court rules, the Michigan rules of evidence, and all of the cases and statutory requirements. You understand that?
I do not.
You do not. What is it about that you do not understand?
It's against my religion to adhere or to assimilate to any statutory.
Sir, I'm not asking anything about your religion. It is irrelevant to me. I am indicating that in this proceeding, you will be required to abide by the rules of this court. Do you understand that?
I'm having a hard time understanding why or how religion doesn't play a role. If
How what?
How religion does not play a role.
Religion does not play a role in what I do or what this court does. There are certain rules of this court established by the legislature and the Michigan Supreme Court regarding how these particular proceedings will be conducted. These proceedings will be conducted in accord with those rules. Do you understand that, sir?
Well, according to the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as the international or the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the state and the governments should.
Sir, you have no authority for what you're about to state, because what you're about to state is incorrect.
In a packed virtual courtroom humming with tension and the faint electronic buzz of microphones waiting to capture every rise in voice or shift in emotion, the morning session opened with a sense of routine that would soon be shattered, for what began as a simple procedural hearing was about to transform into a spectacle of stubborn ideology clashing against unwavering judicial authority, a reminder of how fragile and electrifying the balance of order can be when a single participant refuses to recognize even the basic foundation of the legal system. And as the judge settled into his seat, robe flowing across the high-backed chair like a dark river of authority, he tapped his gavel lightly, signaling that the next case was on deck, unaware, or perhaps merely bracing himself, that the defendant who appeared on the screen would bring with him a torrent of defiance, a storm wrapped in pseudo-legal jargon, the type of litigant who insists he is not subject to the laws of the land because he deems himself separate from society, a sovereign spirit detached from governance, as if personal belief could rewrite centuries of legal structure. And as the defendant's video feed flickered to life, showing a man seated defiantly with arms crossed, eyes hard, and lips pursed with practiced contempt, the judge greeted him with the standard calm professionalism expected of the bench, offering the chance to state his name for the record, but instantly the air shifted when the man refused, declaring in a slow, rehearsed cadence that the name the court possessed referred only to a corporate entity and not to the living soul before them, an argument that the judge had heard many times before yet never seemed to lose its ability to test his patience, and still he attempted to proceed, explaining that identification was required so the court could conduct the hearing, but the man interrupted again, louder this time, insisting that no court had jurisdiction over him unless he consented, which he did not, and so began a spiraling exchange of refusal and correction, the defendant spitting out terms like common law, natural rights, and contractual consent, while the judge tried to steer the hearing back toward the actual legal matters at hand. But the more the judge attempted to maintain decorum, the more the defendant pushed, shaking his head, smirking as if he believed he had cornered the judicial system with rhetoric pulled from obscure corners of the internet, and with every interruption the judge's jaw tightened ever so slightly, his fingers tapping with increasing force upon the bench, though still he tried to keep the proceeding civil, reminding the defendant that the court was not an arena for philosophical debate but a place where real consequences were determined. Yet the defendant only escalated, raising his voice, leaning in toward his camera as if proximity alone could amplify his challenge, proclaiming that the judge had no power over him and that he rejected all unlawful orders, while the judge warned him carefully that continued disruptions would result in contempt. And for a moment there was a brief silence, a lingering pause as though the defendant was considering whether to proceed more cautiously, but then, with a scoff and an accusatory glare, he declared that he didn't recognize the judge as a legitimate authority, calling the entire proceeding a farce, a theatrical display of state overreach. And it was then that the judge's restraint finally cracked, his voice rising, not out of loss of control but out of a decisive need to reclaim the spiraling situation, his tone booming through the speakers as he declared that this courtroom would not be hijacked by theatrics or fictional legal theories, reminding the defendant that he was present because of his own actions, actions governed by the laws of the state whether he personally approved of them or not, and the virtual gallery, though muted, felt the collective intake of breath as the judge continued with commanding authority, explaining in unwavering terms that the right to question, challenge, or disagree with the law did not come with the right to disrupt legal proceedings or ignore lawful orders, and as the defendant attempted to interject again, the judge cut sharply through the attempted objection, invoking the court's inherent power to maintain order and declaring the defendant in contempt, his voice echoing finality, and for the first time since the hearing began, the defendant's face faltered, his confidence shaken by the reality that the judge's authority was not theoretical, not optional, not subject to the defendant's personal beliefs, and in a sudden shift from arrogance to unease, he tried to backtrack, claiming he was merely exercising his rights, though the judge was unmoved, explaining in that same steady yet firm tone that rights do not extend to behavior that obstructs justice, and that respect for the court is not a matter of personal preference but a requirement for any functioning legal system, and the defendant, now more defensive than triumphant, sputtered that he was being treated unfairly, but the judge reminded him calmly that every courtesy had been extended until the defendant chose to sabotage the process, and as the judge issued his orders, clear, stern, and non-negotiable, the courtroom seemed to settle, the earlier chaos slowly replaced by a sense of restored control as the hearing was directed back toward its proper legal path, leaving the defendant to sit and absorb the consequences of provoking a system far larger and more structured than the individual ego could withstand, and though he attempted one more time to reassert his sovereign status, the judge swiftly dismissed the claim, stating that personal ideology does not supersede legal obligation, and ordered the necessary measures to ensure compliance moving forward, which left the defendant visibly frustrated, shifting restlessly in his seat as he realized that his tactics of jurisdictional rejection had not granted him the immunity he imagined, and instead he had only succeeded in escalating his own predicament, while the judge, now composed again, reached for the next file on the docket, signaling with quiet authority that the court would proceed with or without the defendant's philosophical theatrics, and the gallery, though unseen, seemed to collectively acknowledge the decisive moment when the boundaries were redrawn, a moment in which the principles of law and order proved themselves resilient against the disruptive pull of pseudo-legal defiance, and as the hearing wound down, the judge gave one final remark, a reminder that the courtroom does not bend to the whims of individuals who deny its legitimacy, but stands firm as a pillar of civilized society, where rights and responsibilities coexist, and where respect is not a courtesy but a necessity, and the defendant, now subdued, seemed to sense that the confrontation he believed he could control had slipped far beyond his grasp, replaced by the undeniable fact that no declaration of sovereignty could shield him from the consequences of his actions, and as the connection clicked off and the judge prepared to move forward with the remaining cases, the tension that once filled the virtual space dissipated, leaving behind only the echo of the moment when bravado collided with authority, and authority prevailed, reminding everyone present, whether silently observing or actively participating, that the law may be challenged, debated, or interpreted, but it cannot be dismissed by mere declaration, and the courtroom, real or virtual, remains the place where order must triumph over chaos, where justice must hold firm even in the face of defiance, and where those who attempt to place themselves above the system inevitably learn that the system, grounded in structure and upheld by the courts, will always outlast the illusions of those who believe they can outrun it with rhetoric. And thus the hearing concluded with the judge reaffirming that no individual, regardless of personal ideology, is beyond accountability. A reaffirmation that echoed long after the session ended, carried in the minds of all who witnessed how quickly confidence can collapse into regret when the unwavering force of legal authority finally responds.